So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Bill Searles, the professor of CHP cardiovascular perfusion. Please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I was just telling Richard, I want to thank him for the opportunity to give this talk. It's been a talk that's been on my mind for some time. I hope I deliver it effectively, but this is first draft. I got to get you. How do I? Let's go this way. Can you see it? All right. So, in this era of YouTube, you have to have an inflammatory slide. It's kind of like, don't ever do it this way. So my inflammatory slide is the graph is wrong. Now, because this is a scientific conference, you all want something a little bit more intellectual. Then this is a discussion of alternate confirmation biases in VA ECMO. Let's consider our bias. So let's look at a little bit of history. First of all, we're Sunnis celebrating their 50th anniversary. We've been around since 1975. My predecessor was named Jean Lang. She started the program in 75. She was program director until 97. And she was the first female program director in the country. And she started the second university-based program in the USA. And we're very proud of that. We're so proud of that when she died, we just sealed her office. Nobody has gone back in that office. And we wanted to wait until the 50th anniversary. So the other day, I had the opportunity to go into her office. And on the table, there was this book. This is not a recreation. That's the actual thing. And so it turns out that that book was from INSQ. It was published in 1976. And I leafed through it to find the legends of our field. And there's this chapter of physiology and pathophysiology of extracorporeal circulation, which I happen to be interested in, so I thought I would read this chapter, written by some absolute legends, people we've known, we've seen at conferences, we all respect deeply. And I'm reading through it. And we get a couple pages in, and it's got the content of my interest. Hemodynamics, blood flow, volume, and endocrine response. We're still, at this time, trying to figure out how the body responds. So they're going to mix all the hemodynamics in. It says, with the blood heparinized and the venous and arterial cannula in place, veno-arterial bypass is instituted by draining venous blood via siphon into the extracorporeal device and returning it a like amount of blood. It's almost like Old English here. Oh, Richard probably. A similar amount of blood was into the arterial circulation as the heart-lung bypass is gradually begun flow through the pulmonary artery falls off faster than bypass flow increases. Hence, total flow, into the systemic circulation decreases. This is diagrammed. We'll get to that diagram. This is, if blood flow is held constant during perfusion, there will be a gradual decrease in the venous reservoir. I'm going to say that word twice, venous reservoir, which requires transfusion replacement. So clearly, we're talking about cardiopulmonary bypass, right? It's got a venous reservoir. And then I look at the figure that they're referring to, and I think to myself, I think I've seen this before. So where did this graph become famous? What is its legacy to the world? It's been in every single edition of the ECMO textbook. It is the preeminent explanation of VA physiology. And it's always bothered me that it says bypass down here. I thought that was just like some kind of a typo. No, that's legit. That's what he meant. When they made this graph, it was made for cardiopulmonary bypass. I found that to be pretty interesting. And also notice that, did you see the other one? What's it look like? Exactly like this one, except, so honestly, I wanted this to disappear from the textbook after edition number 5. I wanted it to disappear after edition 3, but I only worked up the courage to start complaining about it after edition 5. And when I saw edition 6 on the table, I quickly leafed through it. It was at a conference. I quickly leafed through it to make sure it's not here, it's not here, it's not here, it's not here. And then I found it, and I was like, oh! I immediately texted Ed Darling, Ed, it's still here. And they colorized it. They're doubling down on this graph that's 50 years old and not even about ECMO. So I wanted to talk about why this could have happened. What were people thinking? And I think it really comes down, it's very reasonable. It's about a confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is you have the tendency to search for, interpret, and recall information in a way that supports what you already believe. So given that somebody stood in an operating room, watched cardiopulmonary bypass happen, they developed a certain impression of how things were going to work. And then in explaining ECMO, they made what they observed fit that model. Here's a little example of let's have a little exercise in confirmation bias. If I told you you're on ECMO and the SpO2 is 87, think for a second. What's your opinion? How's it going? It's gonna what? It's too high. It's too high. Yeah, because he thinks we're on VV ECMO. That's too high. But if you thought you're on VA ECMO, you're like, that's great. Same data. You have a bias in its interpretation by what you believed going into the time that you interpreted it. And I think maybe some of that happened here. So I wanted to introduce the idea that there's the old champion of how ECMO is supposedly works, but we know something different. And at this particular moment, it's really fascinating that we're in our mind forcing them to both be true at the same time, even though they really can't both be true at the same time. So what does that graph actually say? I want to make sure it's not just my interpretation of my bias when I look at that graph. So let's get their words right off the page in the latest edition. The hemodynamics of VA ECMO access are demonstrated in that figure down below, which I wrote 50 years ago. The venous blood is drained from the right atrium. We're going to come back on that word drained. And it's perfused into the aorta. The total blood flow remains constant. Pretty clear that what we're doing here is we're taking the venous drainage, we're splitting it, we're sending it some in this direction and some in that direction. When the extracorporeal flow is 100% of the venous return, the systemic pulse contour is flat. So this says, increase your flow, you steal the venous drainage, run it through your ECMO circuit, and subsequently, if you were to achieve all of that, you'll be non-pulsatile on the other side. It explains non-pulsatility on ECMO as simply turn up your flow. This is what happens in heart surgery. It's right in there. There's like a whole page and a half. If you haven't read this chapter closely, go back and read the next page. I left it out of here, but they describe cardiopulmonary bypass, and not well, about what we do. That we accept acidosis, and we have exceptionally low flows of 2.2, which is the flow that they use as an appropriate flow in another chapter. But anyway, that's a different presentation. We'll talk about that later. So maybe there's some confirmation bias here when we look at this data. So let's say if you're on VA ECMO and your cardiac support, for cardiac support, and the patient's blood pressure is non-pulsatile, is that okay? Or is that not okay? Kinda. If you've read this graph, just as the graph, you would have to say, that's great, I'm finally resting completely. The graph at its simplest form explains that, but I think everybody in the room knows that's not the case. That's not what we want to do. So we're blending, however, we're continuing to include the graph in our educational materials, and we're continuing to blend it with the new knowledge, but we won't yet walk away from our previous understanding. The graph explains that your venous drainage steals, your venous line steals the blood, it drains, and it puts it back in the aorta in a non-pulsatile way. So I think it's pretty clear that the graph is born out of an understanding of how bypass works, and that was in their mind when they developed this. And I've tried to explain old school understanding versus new school understanding. And I kind of explain it with this term that I've invented, venocentric. This is a venocentric understanding. So to explain to somebody what ECMO is, you end up telling the story of a circle. You take it out, you're going to put it back in. So let's take this circle and cut it in half, or we're going to put the patient in there and start with just one side, the venous side. When I'm doing this in class, I take the arterial cannula, I put it behind my back for a minute. I'm going to take this venous cannula, we're going to put it into this patient's right side. So if at the beginning there was 5 liters a minute returning to the right side of the heart, and we put a venous cannula in there and take out 4, then math would suggest that you'd have 1 continuing on through, and 1 could come out the other side, and then we would, of course, I have to put this cannula in now to complete the circle. Now we're back to, I'm going to put the 4 back in, we're going to mix that 4 with a 1, and we're going to get 5. We preserved the number 5. because we started with the venous cannula. And that suggests that ECMO splits the venous flow and preserves the cardiac output. An arteriocentric understanding had they started thinking about the circle of life here from the arterial side first, put the venous cannula behind your back, put that arterial cannula, and you might tell a story like this. This patient, we're gonna do the circle. We're gonna take it out, we're gonna put it back in. And how did this patient get here? They have cardiac failure. They can pump 3. They're pumping 3. Currently, right now, we find that to be inadequate. We're not gonna let them die right now, so we're gonna put them on ECMO. I'm going to put them on ECMO, and I'm going to put 5 back into the arterial side. First cannula goes in. Now, if I put the 5 with the 3, I can get 8. And that 8 is going to come back around to the venous side, after which, of course, there would be 5 for me to take out, and there would still be 3 to go through the heart. Venocentric versus arteriocentric understanding of ECMO. It all depends on how you start. I don't know why that's back. And this kind of suggests this is a term that came out of ELSO. The ECMO is a flow pressor. It raises blood pressure with flow. And that follows the simple Ohm's law. Pressure is equal to flow times resistance. So now we've got 2 different flows. We got this flow and that flow. You put them together, you get a bigger flow. You didn't change the R. The P goes up because you doubled the Q. It makes a lot of sense. So the rest of this talk is a discussion of the 3 lethal myths of our understanding of ECMO. And it has a lot to do with our terminology and our language and your preconceived biases about these words. So drainage, unloading, and afterload. And I've had many a conversation at the bedside where I found that this is a sticking point in what we're going to do next. So right down to like, are we going to turn the flow up or are we going to turn the flow down? And it depends on whether or not you're arteriocentric or venocentric in your beliefs. So let's dissect the word drainage. Drainage is kind of like now you see it, now you don't. Any questions? Just in case. Drainage. But this is what we have in ECMO. In ECMO lines, if this is our, you don't need to hear my talking there, I'll talk over that. So this is an ECMO circuit without an oxygenator. We have a patient there represented by a bottle, and watch the blood volume of that patient as there's a blood volume. That handsome hand is pointing at that level right there. Watch that level. And we're going to increase the flow from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. I don't see any drainage. There is no drainage. There's no drainage in ECMO. There is drainage in cardiopulmonary bypass. When you pop the clamp, blood comes out, goes to the reservoir, starts to accumulate. The reservoir level is rising. The blood that was in the heart and the lungs is no longer, it was drained from the heart and the lungs, and now it's down there in the reservoir. And you can watch the CVP drop from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0. And we've drained the heart. So we talk about drainage all the time. We're really comfortable with the word, but we might be just carrying it over too much into the ICU. It's not meant. That word doesn't fit in that application. So how much blood would we have to drain? Well, the statistics say about 9% of your blood volume is a pulmonary circuit and 7%. So 16% of your total blood volume, or somewhere based on the sizes of the people in the room, 750 to 100 mLs. So maybe, it has been suggested to me from people learning, it's in the circuit there somewhere. Something swelled. We sucked it out. We're using vacuum. We packed it in down there. So for that, I have an exercise for you. Take your ECMO circuit, clamp the arterial and venous lines, turn on the pressure monitoring, add 10 mLs. 10 mLs. Your pressure will be like 175. You're not going to sneak in an extra 750 mLs into your ECMO circuit without knowing it. The circuit is, for our purposes, a physicist would disagree with that, but clinically, it's completely non-compliant. You can't put anything in there. It was full, the patient was full. You put these two full things together, you turn it on, patient's still full. Didn't take anything out of it. You go to your ECMO circuit, you grab a syringe and you push something into the ECMO circuit. Where did you put it? Into the patient. None of that volume resides in the circuit, even though they put it there. Put a syringe on that ECMO circuit, pull 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 mLs out. Where did it come from? The patient. The circuit still has its prime volume. So try that exercise if you haven't. And I hope that we can agree at this point, there's no drainage in ECMO. So what's this other word? Unloading. It's a real flash word in ECMO. And it leads to a lot of different decisions. So initially, when you address the word unloading, you have to almost ask the question, why are we having this conversation? Because this is how ECMO works. And you should be able to unload simply by turning the flow up. If you go to the textbook, where is this volume that we're going to unload? The textbook is going to give us 3 possible explanations of where the volume is that we're trying to unload. And they say, well, we left some of it there. We have a goal of setting the flow to 80% of full. We leave 20% going in because in ECMO, we can't have the blood sitting in stasis up there. In bypass, they can. They have more anticoagulation, short period of time. But in ECMO, we need to have a little bit of pulsatile flow so it doesn't clot. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but it understates the problem. And then on another page of the textbook, blood flow not captured by the venous drainage cannula continues as native cardiac output and becomes through the residual cardiopulmonary blood flow, so through the RV. So one of the reasons there's blood up there is because we left it there. But according to that graph, if you just turn up the flow, it wouldn't have been left there. So if you need to rest the patient, more flow. The second page, this is when you go back and read that table, which is not part of this talk, although I'm talking about it right now inside this talk, but it's not part of this talk. And if you look at it, there's venous reservoir on there, but that's it. That's like the only admission that there's a significant difference, and it's not the point of all the text around it. So what are they going to say in the text around it? The heart is completely non-functional. All of the venous return drains into the extracorporeal circuit. So the heart can't pump it. You get it all. Okay? But in ECLS, this leads to 2 problems. First, the left side of the heart gradually fills with blood from the bronchial and thebesians. Dissecting the English here, gradually fills, it used to be empty, with what? Bronchial and thebesians. So that's going to be the second and third source of volume to the left side. And this causes increased pressure in the left ventricle and atrium and pulmonary circulation and ends up causing problems. They're ultimately going to agree to do the right thing, but based on an erroneous misunderstanding. So we already said VA ECMO does not drain blood from the heart. And to the suggestion LV distension as a result of thebesians and bronchioles, let's dissect that. Let's unload the left side. Your normal cardiac output is 3.5 to 5 liters a minute for adults. Pediatric people, you can do your own math. Divide by something, some big number. It's just smaller. But you still have thebesians, and your bronchioles can be out of control. So this would be totally different. This is one of the few ways that pediatrics are different than, I just say that for fun, inflammatory YouTube title. So thebesians, 0.12 to 0.43%. A tenth to a 40% of a single percentage, or about 24 mLs per minute. Bronchial flow, 1 to 2%, or about maybe 110 mils per minute. So you put those 2 together, 134 mLs per minute divided by 60 beats, 2.2 mLs per beat. I think my patients are ejecting a whole lot more than that. Get a big pulse. So where did it come from? It came from the right side. From us not picking it up, if you believe the graph, or we could have never taken it away if you believe the more modern stuff. So we haven't removed any volume. The heart was full when we started. The heart is still full. There's no unloading in ECMO. Inherently, ECMO doesn't unload the heart, doesn't drain it, can't unload the ventricle. So this has created some kind of some suggestions about VA ECMO. VA ECMO is bad for hearts. You can kind of summarize that from various texts. I like to suggest that VA ECMO is not bad for hearts. If you do VA ECMO wrong, that's bad for hearts. So bad VA ECMO is bad for hearts, but you can do some great things for hearts if you know how VA ECMO actually works. ECMO is not like bypass. So it comes around to the afterload. And what's the issue with afterload? We have had to begin to, even though we have a graph that says ECMO works a certain way, to explain what we're seeing, then we're stuck in the previous idea, but we have this observation that doesn't make sense. We introduce a new thing instead of fixing the old thing. We're introducing. Oh yeah, well, let's without talking about why the graph is wrong, let's talk about afterload. And this is a real thing. Both the new and the old agree about this. With a competent aortic valve and poor LV function, peripheral VA ECMO pressurizes the aorta, resulting in a proportionally excessive LV afterload. This was my favorite one. In explaining cardiac ECMO, during VA ECMO, blood flow from the arterial cannula generates supraphysiologic afterload. And this is the attitude that is conveyed. It's that damn ECMO circuit. ECMO is bad. Supraphysiologic. Let's take that apart. So we had a heart that was sick, and we're trying to save the patient. It was doing everything it can. Its maximum effort was to generate a pressure of 65. And at the time, it could open the valve, but we thought they were going to die. He said, we don't have to die right now, so we put you on ECMO. And we put a cannula in there, and we bring that up to 75. That gradient right there is more than the heart's capable of lifting. It can't open the door anymore. The aortic valve doesn't open. But 75 is normal blood pressure. It's not supraphysiologic. We took something that was too low and we brought it back to normal. Don't blame ECMO. ECMO actually saved this patient's life. If your pressure is supraphysiologic, it's because you are doing bad ECMO. It's because you're running the drips really high, or you have way more flow than you need, because the flow, ECMO is a flow pressor. So if you're running this at 7 liters a minute and the patient only needs 3, you're going to have a blood pressure of 110 because you got 2 Qs that you had it together. It could be your flow that's too high, your fault. It could be the drips that you haven't turned off yet, your fault. Don't blame the ECMO. We agree that because when the aortic valve closes, we should do these things. That's very important. I don't disagree with that, and the ELSO textbook is very clear about that as well. It's very successful. And the first thing to do is reduce your ECMO flow. Isn't it fascinating that on page 81, we tell you that the first thing you should do is turn the flow up. But by the time we get to page 374, actually what I meant was turn the flow down. Turn the flow down, increase the inotropes back up again to get the heart to eject. You got to do that. We got to reduce the SVR. If the patient is peripherally very tight from all the pressures you were running previously, and in some way you can reduce that, that's fine. You should do that too. And if that doesn't get the heart, the valve opening again, then we are very accurately, they have stated, concern for stasis and pulmonary edema. So fire up the balloon pump, the egg pellet, do an atriotomy, surgical event, those kinds of things. But there's been another suggestion in numerous papers, and that is that the concern really is, it's like, well, Bruce, your the pressures you're reading are only the static pressure. We know that, physicists have told us that there's more than one kind of pressure. There's dynamic pressure as well. You put the two of them together, you get a total pressure, or sometimes called a stagnation pressure, and we're only measured in one of those. So I can imagine that the problem really is, because I want to blame ECMO, is that I put that cannula down here in the groin and we're pumping it backwards. That's not the way blood flow is supposed to go. So I've got this dynamic pressure that we can't measure pushing down on the aortic valve. I see that it says only 75 and you want to call that normal, but I'm going to still call it supraphysiologic. That's 4 liters a minute blasting into the aortic valve in the wrong way. So pressure total equals pressure static versus pressure dynamic. What about the pressure that we're not measuring pushing on the aortic valve? To measure that, there's this thing called a pitot tube, and this would be how we normally measure pressure. Pressure is exerted at right angles, and it's in every particular direction, pushing at a right angle on whatever it has contact with. That's your static pressure. The stagnation pressure is what if we were to include into our observation the density of the fluid and the velocity of that fluid. So let's measure the pressure in line with the fluid. And what that will do is it'll give you a higher pressure. So, from physics, totally true. Wondering exactly how important that is to us. So let's do some math on that. Let's ask some smart AI models to do some calculus and some algebra that I didn't really feel like doing. Let's copy and paste it in here. Let's pretend like I'm really smart, but this is just a simple question. But it did convert flow rate to velocity, and then it looked at calculating the dynamic pressure. It appreciated conversion from from pascals to millimeters of mercury. It assumed a certain density of blood, and it came up with that the pressure, if I told it you're flowing 4 liters a minute at the aortic valve and your pressure is 65, what's the total pressure? The math says 0.08 higher than that. So that's why we don't ever talk about it, because somebody 30 or 40 years ago did this math and stopped teaching it because it's not clinically relevant. Physicists would be outraged. I can measure it. It's still really important. Clinician, not even 1 millimeter of mercury. So retrograde flow does not raise afterload greater than antegrade flow. They knew this way back when. This is that book, the first edition of Ionescu, whether the arterial perfusion is retrograde via the femoral or iliac artery or prograde, which why didn't that word catch on? That was a great word, prograde. Now we're antegrade. Or prograde through the aortic arch of the subclavian artery, it appears to have no effect on the physiology or extracorporeal circulation under conditions of total bypass. So they weren't concerned about it back then, but we're starting to become concerned about it now, trying to understand that graph doesn't work, but I really want it to work. VA afterload is normal, not super physiologic. If it's higher than that, then it's your fault. The afterload is normal, but the heart is weak. We should maintain a load to normal, maintain it at normal, but low, with a map of 65 and a systolic of 90. That's right out of the ELSO textbook. They got a lot of things right, just the mechanism of, they told you what to do, but it doesn't match up with how they told you things worked. So if afterload is super physiologic, that's on you. So those are my 3 myths. That's what I have a concern about. I think the graph is wrong, and I guess you might ask, so what? They told me the right thing to do. But I think for me, it is a matter of the graph misinforms a new cohort of learners every single year. And we have the same conversation with people who are just starting to think about ECMO every single year. And I'm explaining to them that, no, we got to turn it down. I know the graph says you have to turn it up. And it really comes down to that bias that I suggested. You can see the scenario where you're standing at the bedside, and if you want more, I want to rest this heart more, can you turn that flow up? Like, no, I can't. We're going to actually turn that down. It's counterintuitive based on that old understanding, but it's the right thing to do. So this is where I think I'm supposed to take my shoe off and pound on the table and say, like, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. I hope that in the 7th edition of the next textbook, the graph is replaced with something a little more scientific. And a shout out to anybody that's writing anything, whether it's you and your PowerPoints or whether you're an author and you're going to write journal articles, pick your words really carefully, because if you use the word drainage, you saw the videos. Everybody agrees that the first 2 were drainage. There's no drainage. We shouldn't talk about our venous drainage. Maybe venous circulation? I don't know. We can open up the floor. What's a good and accurate way to talk about what that venous cannula does, since we know it doesn't drain? Don't blame the Thebesians. Don't blame the bronchioles. They have so little to do with this. And it's not about retrograde flow. I'm glad we took the time to ask an AI model to do the math for us, so that we can again forget about that and take it back out of our calculations. It's all about pressure, and we are responsible for the pressure. What are your thoughts about this?
Thank you, Bruce, for such interesting reports. It's really great work. And I guess the audience have a lot of questions.
Bruce, thank you very much. Richard, this is the first YouTube video, okay, that we generate from here. I am literally not exaggerating, but every single day on ECMO rounds, I have this exact same conversation with either a ICU resident, an ECMO fellow, and more disappointingly with attendings and intensivists who have read the red book and have it wrong.
It's just a human nature kind of thing. That graph is on page 81. Everybody's strong enough to read to 81. Nobody's going to read to 437, which is where they finally introduced the fact that the graph is wrong, but they won't even come out and say that the graph is wrong. They'll just start explaining the other side. They hope that in the previous 400 pages, you've forgotten what you told them. Now let me teach you something new. There was a particular event where I had a cardiologist was giving rounds, and they were talking about a patient who had some lung problems and some heart problems. The heart problems had resolved. We're on VA ECMO. Lung problems still kind of there. We need ECMO for oxygenation. Why don't we switch to VV? The suggestion is made, and he says, I don't want to switch that. We're unloading the right ventricle by 4 liters right now. I said, I don't think we are. And long conversation.
During your presentation, George and I was sneaking over my shoulder saying, I have this exact conversation every day. He said, so do I. And I think the point that is often missed is this is a hydraulic system, and hydraulics are not compressible. And so if my circuit starts with a liter of prime, it always has a liter of prime. And I don't care what I put into the heart to instrument the heart and bleed it into my circuit has a liter of prime. There's no capacitance in the circuit whatsoever. And I can't tell you, we're a teaching hospital. We have the fellows coming through all the time. I tell them all the time, there's no drainage, there's no unloading. And it is absolutely this talk. And it's got to go on YouTube so I can show it. I have to say, our ECMO leadership team meets every Friday morning, and this is going on the agenda as soon as it's out there for sure.
Thank you.
Same here. I agree with great presentation, Bruce. And I agree with the same thing. We have the same exact thing that happens in our institution. I've been teaching now the fellow, they actually don't understand it, that maybe because we're perfusionists, we operate the heart and lung machine. And then we know what true drainage is. And I tell them, you're actually increasing the afterload on a sick heart. Now, my question to you as well, with VA ECMO, what do we see on once we go on maybe day 2? A lot of third spacing. So with having the patient as a constant bottle, I think some of our volumes go into third space. So what's your thought on that now? How does it kind of play with VA ECMO?
It's a glycocalyx injury. That's how we present it. So when I boil everything down to the ECMO education, I've got 8 hours to give it. I know ELSO says 24. We do it in 8 for ECMO specialists. There's 3 goals of ECMO: stop the dying, help the healing, get the volume off. You can state that another way. Provide a lot of oxygen. How much oxygen? So much oxygen that you don't need the organ that's trying to kill the patient. So rest the organ that's trying to kill the patient. And then don't forget that sometime you're gonna have to come back and take that volume off. But you can't do it right away. Day 2, you're still leaking. If that's not bleeding, which you should fix the bleeding one way, coagulation or suture. But if you're leaking through your capillaries, it's because you have a glycocalyx injury. Fancy way of saying you're third spacing. Can't fix that right now. You just have to chase it with volume. It's not until you build billions of more little glycocalyx proteins and patch up the endothelial lining again that you'll stop leaking. Once you stop leaking, you can go after the volume. That's why it's the third goal and not the first goal.
Thank you.
I just have a practical announcement, and I will come to you then. The people from Terry just told me that all the videos will be on YouTube by the end of next week. And I would like to shout out to the wonderful work that Terry and Jorge did this week, and they've been running this very smoothly. Thank you.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Any questions from the chat?
Hello.
Hi,
I'm still with you.
we also have the same issues at our hospital. What you had presented was a slide on being cannulated in series. Do you personally think that that graph would actually change somewhat if you're cannulated in the femorals with the opposing forces going up and having the north-south syndrome? Do you actually see that? Has anybody looked at that graph?
The ELSO graph? You just make sure we're talking about the same graph. So the graph is only about hemodynamics and not about oxygenation. So if you dissect the two apart, what I try to suggest is that the retrograde flow does not create any pressure any clinically greater pressure than what we can see. So if you're pushing it backwards and there's a pressure of 75 pushing on the aortic valve, I just wouldn't call it supraphysiologic. It's higher than it was. It's more than the heart can work against, but it's just normal blood pressure, and we want a normal blood pressure. So retrograde flow, or even if you have the cannula in the axillary, it's still coming back at the aortic valve, but now through only this much space, not measurably different. The north-south syndrome is a different issue. So that's all about oxygenation. You have to appreciate that as well. Yeah.
We should have Dr. Shivakula from the other day map all these flows for us, and then we can make a proper graph.
That would be yeah. He can do that all digitally, right?
Yeah.
So isn't that fantastic? So, so this was, I didn't really get into it too much, but the subtitle there about biases, right? So we were very confident that the thing that I'm talking about is true. And how do we know? Mostly from our own simulations. There's great models that we have, the Harvey simulator and other software programs written by the people with the bias against the graph that teach us. I drank that Kool-Aid. So what we really do need is some actual live measurements. I'm working with Cornell right now. We have the opportunity and the technology to put like $50,000 worth of technology into a single animal. We have left and right pressure volume curves, and we're going to do some flow ramps up and down and try and hold everything constant.
We actually started doing it. So when you go on within 24 hours, we bring the patient back. Oh, okay. We bring the patient back, and then we do biventricular support with a 5.5 or NARVAD device. And we actually been seeing much better improvement with outcomes. So put them on in the cath lab, sit on them, manage for 24 hours or 48 hours, bring them back for biventricular. And I think that's probably going to be better than sitting on them for, a week via ECMO and just increase the afterload. And, that's what we've been doing.
You got to be really intelligent about your VA ECMO and know when to institute a VAD. VA ECMO is not a VAD. If you wanted ventricular support, you wanted to put the cannula over here on the left side. Instead, you put it over here. That is, if you look it up and put all the blood vessels together, like 50 to 60,000 miles away from where you need to be. So a VAD drains directly from the LV.
We have to conclude.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
So now we have a little break to drink coffee, and we're coming back.